Hello. Hi, good afternoon, Ryan. We still have some folks joining the call. So, hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Can I just get confirmation you can hear me? Perfect. Thank you. All right. This is training session number 2. Right? Let me look here. FutureFeed and training 2. Yes, we're in training 2. So you may have met me in the first training session. My name is Rachel Leidy. I am the Director of Compliance Education here at FutureFeed, and I am going to be leading today's session. Got a couple people still joining. Hello. Hi, Brian. Welcome. So I will get started here. I'm going to share my screen. Again, just a reminder, this session is open to all FutureFeed users. And so do be aware that there's other organizations, companies on the call today. It is being recorded. So after we end the call today, you should get a link to that recording. Takes about an hour, hour and a half to be sent though. All right. Sign into FutureFeed here, and then I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right, so we can get started. First, I guess this is a smaller group, so let me just open up, the floor and, well, as soon as I can find you guys, I never know where this. All right. Does anyone have any questions or need any guidance from what was taught in the first session?
Hi, Rachel. I don't know if it might not be related to the first training portion. Maybe it's covered in here. I currently have Prevail, and they have provided an SSP. And so
Yep,
one of the questions I will have at some point is that, how do I ingest that in? Like, what's the best path forward?
sure. Yeah. That kind of was covered. I mean, not like directly covered, but it would have been um something, oops, let me go to this one here, that was applicable in the first session.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
I can
And
definitely go
and
back
I
over.
was on there's like a 15-minute call every Thursday. I was actually on that call.
Yeah.
And I forgot, I think Mark was handling that call today.
Yep.
And you mentioned that there's some partnership with Prevail where because of that partnership, and if we have a paid plan with Prevail, there's some there's some benefits. Um, but I don't know the details of what was mentioned, but that's what I was told.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that, but I will follow up with Mark on that.
Okay.
And that's okay. Let me jot your name down here. I will ask Mark what that's all about, and then I will get back to you via email.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So, but I can show you where you would. I'm assuming they also provided you a customer responsibility matrix or a
Yes.
shared responsibility matrix.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So what you're going to want to do is you don't have to put their system security plan into FutureFeed. Any C3PAO assessors, when they're evaluating Prevail's level of compliance, really the main document they're going to ask for is that shared responsibility matrix, customer responsibility matrix, whatever they're calling it. Um, so what I would do for you is in the documents section of FutureFeed, go to reference docs And in here, there's a category for you to house all of your CRMs. And, I'm not sure what they're calling it, but if they're calling it an SRM, it's the intent of the document is the same, so you'd still house it in this CRM section. Let's see, do I have one? So it looks like previously someone created one for training purposes. So, name it whatever you'd like, maybe Prevail CRM, CRM-Prevail. Add that inventory item by clicking on add and then titling it whatever you'd like. After you create the inventory item, open it up, and then I would take their CRM and attach it here. And then what I would do is I would go up to the connect, and it's a lot of controls. I think they are implementing within the Prevail software. They're implementing like 100 and 200, like it's a decent amount of control. So you'll have to connect a decent amount. But now I would start tagging all of those controls that are fully implemented by Prevail or partially implemented by Prevail. So that way, that Prevail CRM is found under each of the controls where there's some inheritance. It would be found after you make the connection. It's going to be found in the examine area of that control. So that's some potential evidence that an assessor will want to review if you're calling out Prevail inheritance.
Gotcha. And that CRM should be mapped back to Prevail under tools, right? And if we do it from tools, do we map the controls and objectives from tools?
It's, you can map it a couple different ways. If you establish the connection between the Prevail CRM and the Prevail tool, then you only will need to connect Prevail all those controls to one of those items because they're linked, and so
Right.
you're gonna get to them anyway. It's whatever your preference is.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so today's training, we're going to cover the assess area FutureFeed, system security plan, your FutureFeed POAM, and the deliverables. All right, so I'm just going to get started and then shout if you have any questions along the way, or feel free to drop them in the chat if you'd prefer. All right, so the assess area of FutureFeed, this is where you're documenting your implementation status of all of the requirements. This is not where any external third-party providers are going to be documenting their results. It's solely a place for your company to it's your responsibility to manage the results and the data that's in this area of FutureFeed. I just wanted to be clear on that. Some folks think that okay, I'm going to have a C3PAO assessment team assess me, so they're going to fill out this section, and that's not the case. However, if you do go through any external assessments, whether you pay for a company to do like a basic assessment or a gap assessment for you, or you even go through a C3PAO assessment, you would want to take those results from that evaluation and make them match in here. Or, add them to here. So let's go over all of the fields in this area. All right. I like to use 318 for this training. And let me minimize all these. All right. So all of the controls have these 6 sections. We'll go through them all one at a time. So before we get into them, though, I want to show you, you can see how many points that requirement is weighted for. So 318 is a 1-pointer. Up here we have copy control. I'll show you that in a little bit. And then every control has its own guidance narrative. Okay, so if you need some more information, supplemental guidance, some clarification on that requirement, click on this guidance icon, this book icon, and you'll find some more information there to include some examples and references. You can rearrange the order of what is displayed in the screen. For example, if you're making an effort to go through all of the control requirements and just identify the people responsible, maybe you would move interview up so you can just see that at the top of the page. But you can reorder them if you'd like, clicking on that little gear icon there. The requirement satisfaction summary, let's deep dive this section. Here is where you're going to identify if the requirement is implemented or not. So if it's met or not met, or if it happens to be not applicable for your environment, you can identify that as well. When you first get access to FutureFeed, everything should be in this unknown state, meaning you have no assessment result in FutureFeed. It's also where you're gonna, for anything that you say is met, close that one out here, close these out. For any of the objectives that you say are met, you would define in the objective statement area how that objective is being met in your environment. Okay, so here's an example. The means of limiting unsuccessful login attempts is defined. When I write my objective statements, I kind of just regurgitate the objective in an affirmative way, right? So the means of limiting unsuccessful login attempts is defined as 5 attempts within 15 minutes, or some people would prefer to do that. Oh. The means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is defined in the access control policy. So it's really your company's preference on how you want to address these. You do not have to define, if an objective has the word define in it, you don't have to define that in your system security plan, meaning in this area of FutureFeed, because what you're doing here is you're building out your system security plan. I'm sorry.
Dashboard. You can quickly understand your organization's data security posture.
Ryan, I did put you on mute just because there was some background noise. No worries though, just letting you know. All right, so you can define the objective in detail in your system security plan if you'd like, but you can also have those definitions in other policies, procedures, other documentation that is part of your system security plans, okay? But what my recommendation to you guys is just have one source of truth, okay? What it was originally when I showed you, when it was like, is defined as 5 attempts in 15 minutes and defined in the access control policy. I mean, if you want to do it that way, you can. I always try to refrain from doing that because I want one source of truth. If I always preferred to leave it something like this. Why doesn't it let me highlight and delete? Okay. Defined in the access control policy. That way, if I ever change that definition, I only have to change it in one place. Whereas if I have it defined in my policy and I have it defined in my system security plan, if I make a change, I have to make sure I've changed both those documents, okay? So it's really your preference and how you like to handle it. But here's an example of an objective statement, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and mark this one met. Now, when I say something is met, I prefer to have evidence. Okay, so now in my statement, I'm calling out a document, which tells me that down below in the examine section, I should find that document. And there it is. If you, in your objective statements, these here, or your summary notes up here, if you call out a document or a process or a procedure, a form, checklist, what have you, any documentation, you will want to find that down below in the examine section. You want to make sure that your evidence found down here supports what you define up here in your implementation narratives. Okay? We also have this area called summary notes. So this summary notes is where I define at a high level how this overall requirement is getting implemented. And then in the objective notes, the objective statements down here, I speak directly towards that one objective. For example, for the next one, the defined means of limiting unsuccessful login attempts is implemented. Okay, so here's that validation objective. Good amount of the requirements have one objective, one or more objective. That is just like the validation objective. So here's where they're going to be looking for screenshots that, or evidence that what you define in objective A is true and it's actually being implemented everywhere in your assessment scope that it should be implemented. Okay, so here's an example of how I would write this statement up for this fake environment. Okay, so I'm saying Windows, for my Windows assets, the defined means of limiting unsuccessful login attempts is implemented by my Entra ID with a policy that's enforced to all my assets. And then I go on to say Entra ID is managed by an external service provider called Company ABC, who is responsible for configuring and maintaining Entra ID. Then I have an on-prem firewall that needs to implement this requirement. And the defined means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is implemented by a local security configuration setting on the firewall, which is managed by my IT admin. And then in this instance, here's a good example for you, is in this fake environment, it looks like we're also using Prevail. And in that case, I'm not responsible for configuring Prevail's limit of unsuccessful logon attempts, nor can I. Like, I'm not responsible, and you can't even configure that for that type of tool. And so here I'm just saying fully inherited C Prevail SRM. A couple of things that I want to point out here is I'm a lead CCA, so I also do assessments. And I've been in a couple assessments where the company failed a requirement because they failed to address the implementation method for all in-scope assets. Okay? So when you're working on your objective statements, or even that summary note area up here, do make sure you have a good understanding of your compliance boundary or your assessment scope. Okay, so that way you can address how that requirement and how those objectives are implemented for all the assets. If that implementation is the same across the board, no matter if it's an IT asset, a person asset, like external asset, a vendor provided asset, if that implementation is the same, then one statement should be sufficient. However, when it comes to like the technical requirements, like this one, 318, typically depending on your scope and the type of assets, the implementation is different if you have different types of technology. Okay, so I'm just showing you here that when you're writing these objective statements, do have in mind that assessment scope and make sure you're addressing how it's implemented on all of the all assets within your assessment scope. Okay, that's one point I want to make because I've seen a lot of failures related to that. Where a company would address kind of the major assets there, like their user laptops and their user workstations, but then they failed to address the security protection asset implementation, like firewall or SIEMs, or even the remote management tools that they use. Those are security protection assets, and they need to implement 171, right? So another one that was commonly missed is any major applications that store, process, or transmit CUI, like Prevail here. They would fail to address that implementation for those major applications. Okay, so when you move into an assessment, in the preliminary, the pre-assessment meetings, the assessment team is going to meet with you and discuss your assessment scope and make sure that they have a good understanding of all the assets in your environment. So then when they move into the assessment and they have to validate the implementation of the requirements on all those assets, they can understand what all needs to be tested, as well as what all needs to be addressed in your system security plan. Okay, so that's just one point I wanted to make. Another thing I want to talk about is just this for any inheritance. For example, Prevail here. I again, back to the one source of truth. In that Prevail CRM, SRM, or in any external service providers CRMs, that's typically where you're going to find the detail related to how security is implemented on those assets, or how the requirements are implemented on those assets. That or the system security plan. So like you mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, see the Prevail SRM and SSP. Okay, so here I'm calling out two documents, and again, I want to find those documents down below in the examine section so I can quickly pull them up for an assessment. But I'm refraining from going into a lot of detail on how Prevail is implementing the requirement, because again, if Prevail changes that implementation and they change their system security plan or they change their CRM, SRM, then if I have it defined in here in great detail, I'm going to have to change what I've defined in here. So I always like to use like statements like this, where I'm just pointing to the document provided by the external service provider that would provide that detail an assessor is going to look for with regards to requirement implementation and requirement implementation responsibility. Okay. Any questions so far? This is just an example. This is just recommendations, you know. There's more than one way to do things in this world of CMMC, that's for sure.
Rachel, one question. So theoretically, like using those examples for Windows and on-prem, for the two different objectives, we can put in exactly how we're implementing it and what are the controls, like very detailed, right, in the objectives?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And I would, yeah. Especially if your company is responsible for implementing that and managing those assets and configuring those assets, yes, go into detail.
Thank you.
Let me clear these out real quick. I'm going to clear this stuff out so that way we can walk through this next part of the... Okay. All right, so it would look like this if you're just filling this out. All right, so again, in my statement here, I say my Windows, the implementation of the limit of unsuccessful logon attempts for my Windows assets is being done by company ABC, who's a external service provider, a local IT company who I've paid to manage my Entra ID. All right, so I have what we within FutureFeed are calling inheritance. And then firewall is my responsibility, my company's responsibility solely to implement. And then prevail, again, I have some inheritance here. So whatever you say in your objective narrative, it should align. If you're calling out inheritance, then it should match this teardrop here. Okay, so for this example, I'm not going to say it's fully inherited because that means all implementation for all assets in my assessment scope is being performed by someone other than my company, an external service provider. And that's not the case here because I said the firewall implementation is managed by my system administrator. Okay, so it's partially inherited. Overall, this objective is partially inherited. When you call out inheritance, then what will show up is this yellow triangle. So now it's saying, hey, you're telling me that there's some inheritance. Please identify where that inheritance is coming from. Okay, so you're going to want to click on that yellow triangle and then identify the inheritance. Note here that Entra ID is, I can't click on Entra ID. The reason I can't click on it though is because if I scroll down under test, where I find all my technology, it's because it doesn't have the CRM flag, the customer responsibility matrix flag. So if you, in this teardrop area, if you see the tool listed but you can't click on it, that's because the CRM flag isn't set here. So now what I want to do is open up my Entra ID. Remember I said it's being managed by company ABC. And in this customer responsibility matrix, I want to make sure I have identified that responsibility and who's it's coming from. So company ABC. Now you see this listing of SRMs and CRMs here. These show up, these options in this drop-down menu show up when in the documents area of FutureFeed, if I go to reference docs, CRMs. So here's all my CRMs. You have to have this, you have to have something entered here in order for it to show up in that inventory item drop-down menu. Okay, so let me go back down there. All of these options are because I've created those entries in my CRM documents section. I could also create one here and add new if I need to. But now that I've called out that CRM, let me refresh the page here. And scroll down. Okay, now Entra ID has the CRM flag. And now if I go back, okay. So I'm going to send that over to the dev team because that's a new one for me. Let me see what happened. Let's see if it does it again. Okay. So now if I scroll up under my teardrop, I'm going to select, yep, let me hit refresh here. Okay. All right, so now I'm gonna select Entra ID because Entra ID is managed by company ABC, so I have inheritance there. Prevail, I have inheritance. And then I'm even gonna select Windows Pro 11 in this case, inheritance, because those endpoints are being managed by Entra ID, which is managed by an external service provider. Okay, so now I've correctly identified the inheritance level and where that inheritance is coming from, and it matches what I've defined in my objective statement. Another thing here is if you don't see the tool, if you just don't see what you want to select, it's because you haven't linked it down here under tools and services. Okay. All right, so if you mark something not met, I'm going to mark this first objective not met. Notice right now there's just a plus sign, but as soon as I mark something not met, it will make FutureFeed does create that first POA&M entry for you. So whenever you mark something not met, you should make it a point to then open up that POA&M item and rework this POA&M description area. This is where you're defining, you can define what failed, what was the issue, but most importantly, you want to define what's the remediation plan, what's the fix, or what's the implementation plan, okay? So the POA&M will come pre-filled out as shown here, but all of this is just meant to be helpful guidance for when you do have to write your own remediation plan or implementation plan. It should be customized and tailored to fit your exact environment. So you'll want to rework, review, and edit this POA&M description, as well as assign responsibility and identify impact, effort, and cost if you'd like, and set a due date. Okay. A couple things. When I was doing POA&M management for the government, we were not allowed by policy. There was a policy that says we cannot mark things met without having that evidence in EMAS. And so it's completely your company's call and how you want to handle things. But me personally, when I do compliance management, if I mark something met, that's because I also have the evidence and I have validated that it is implemented. So that's your call. Some folks, if you're waiting on evidence, for example, this one here, when I talk about Entra ID and a policy that enforces it, I want to see that I want to see a screenshot of that policy. And I want to see that my assets are picking up that policy from Entra ID. So I want some screenshots there, or someone to jump on a meeting with me and share their screen, and I put eyes on those settings. This one here, the firewall setting, I want to screenshot or again see in a meeting that that setting is implemented correctly on the firewall. Okay, so if you need, it's your call. You can mark it met and still make a POA&M item. And your POA&M could simply, instead of like having to actually go out and implement something, your POA&M could be like, please provide screenshot of, firewall config setting, yada, 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 right? Or you could leave it in an unknown state until you get that evidence and upload it into FutureFeed. Or you can mark it not met and create a POA&M to gather that evidence. All I'm trying to say is if you're waiting on evidence because you need that evidence for a C3PAO assessment and you want to get the evidence and you want to upload it into FutureFeed so that way you can find it down below in the examine section. If you're waiting on that evidence, find a way to make sure you're tracking that evidence is needed. Recommended to do so on your POAM. In this requirement satisfaction summary, you have a confidence level rating. So, if, for example, I'm interviewing one of you guys and I say, hey, is the means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts defined? And you verbally just tell me, yeah, that's defined in my access control policy. Well, until I actually put eyes on that access control policy and read it and find the definition in there, my confidence level that is actually implemented is not going to be, a 10, we may be at 4. So this is more just internal for you guys, and it could be another way of tracking the need to obtain evidence for the purpose of validating. But that's what that confidence rating is for. We have an area for you to discuss internal notes. This is not going to be shown in your system security plan. This is also where you could say, please provide screenshots. You just want to make sure that somewhere you're documenting that the evidence is still needed. We also have a video for you to watch if you need to learn a little bit more about the requirement. And if you can just give me 1 second here, I will be right back. I am not sure what I'm doing here. Sorry, I'm trying to mute myself and I don't have the same type of settings. Okay. That's okay. All right. Any questions about this requirement satisfaction summary here? Okay, it's a place for you to define how the requirement's implemented. And when you say something is met, be sure to define in the statements how it's met and collect that evidence, upload it into FutureFeed, and so that way you can find that evidence down below in the examine area. The other sections of the assess area, we have an interview section. So here is where you're identifying, using the RACI model again, who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for this one requirement. This is important to fill out. Of course, anybody you identify here potentially could be interviewed by a C3PAO assessment team, but also you have a requirement to do an annual security control assessment. That's in the 312 family over here, security assessment. It's 312-1. Annually assess security controls within your assessment scope to determine if they are still effective and implemented and working appropriately. Okay. So the interview section is not only who is going to be interviewed during a C3PAO assessment, but it's also who you're going to be interviewing and reaching out to at least once annually to validate that what is required is still implemented and working as intended. We have the examine section. So I think this is pretty clear now. This is where you're going to house all your documentation. Then you have a test section. This is where all your tools and technology. Let me go back to that 3.1 control. 3.1.8. All right. So here I'm identifying the tools that are implementing the requirement for me. So these are my security protection assets, but I'm also identifying the tools that are that need to implement the requirement. And it looks like I'm missing one here. I'm missing my firewall. So as your, do I have any firewall that I could link? That's a firewall. As you're doing your internal assessment, that's the time you're going to want to clean up these sections of FutureFeed. You're going to want to make sure your interview section is accurate, your documentation's accurate, and your test is accurate. So that way, when you do have to prepare and move into that annual, that C3PO assessment, a lot of this is filled out and it's accurate. You will want to make it a point to review what's in FutureFeed prior to going into that C3PO assessment. But if you've been maintaining FutureFeed, throughout the months or years, and you're doing that annual security control assessment, and you're doing your continuous monitoring activities, then what is in FutureFeed should be fairly accurate. And easier to update and, review for that external assessment. We have an area for you to upload additional artifacts. Anything you upload here is only going to be found under the requirement you uploaded in. Okay, so if you're uploading a piece of evidence that can also be used to validate another requirement, then you might want to upload that evidence under the documents section and then map it to the multiple requirements you want it to be found under. Instead of having to upload it multiple times under the control itself, it's probably easier to upload into documents and then just map and tag all of the controls. And then last section is we have this potential assessment consideration section. This is where if you are doing an internal assessment, a gap assessment, and you need some guidance on what to ask the people you identified in the interview section. Okay, these are just helpful questions, and you can actually answer them here. So is there a defined mean? Is there a defined limit? Yes. Okay, well, what is it? And if you say no, you're actually making a POA&M. And why did it fail, what needs to be fixed, and hit submit, and then you've created a POA&M entry. All right, any questions with the assess area and the 6 sections here? All right, I said I would get back to this copy control. So what this is it's when you fill out this requirement satisfaction summary area, okay, and you fill out these summary notes here, and you fill out the interview, examine, and test section, what you can do is you can copy all of the information from these 4 sections and send that information to another control. So this copy control, right now I'm in 318, and I want to send my summary notes, interview, examine, or test to any one of the controls listed here. So we have the recommendations. These are our recommendations where we've found that some of this information relates. For example, our recommendation for this 318 control is that we recommend you take everyone you've interviewed, or everyone, all the roles, teams, people that you've identified in the interview section under the RACI model, and send them to these controls here. And we just found that because this, for example, this one control, it's really technical, okay? So typically, the people responsible for implementing this technical requirement are like your system admins, your system developers, IT folks. And the accountable is, IT management, maybe the information system owner. consulted and informed is often the same. Because this control here is very technical, we're recommending that you send that interview information over to these other controls, which are also very technical and typically get implemented by the same roles, teams, people. You know, your system admin is going to implement 318, but it's also going to implement, you know, your session lock and your session termination. And so that's how our recommendations work. You don't have to use them though. You can remove them if you don't want. And you do have this manual selection capability. So if you want to pick and choose what you want to send to, do you want to send everything over there or maybe just the summary notes? It's this whole copy control functionality is meant to help you with populating FutureFeed, the assess area quickly, you know, more efficiently, I guess. Of course, when you copy that data over to another control, you'll want to review that other control and make sure that, you know, the people you've identified are accurate. And if it's not, then you just remove a couple of them instead of having to connect all those people again. Same thing with examine, you know, think about this access control policy. Do you want to quickly associate that with other controls within this interface? I know you can do it in the document interface, but within this interface, do you want to send it over to another control? So that's the copy control function there. Last thing I want to show you here is in the assess area, we do have a rapid gap assessment mode. So right now, every page is going to just list one requirement. And if I want to go to the next one, I got to go up here and click on the next one. Whereas if you're doing like a gap assessment and you want to only evaluate requirement implementation or objective implementation and you don't care about figuring out interview, examine, test, artifacts, all this stuff, you can go to click on this hamburger menu icon here and this little running guy. This is the rapid gap assessment mode. So now if I click this, in this one page, I have all of my controls listed for the AC family. 311, scroll down, 312. It's not showing the interview, examine, test sections. It's just showing that one requirement satisfaction summary. So if you need to quickly go through and answer yes or no, create POA&Ms to get that score and do that gap assessment, then plan over in deliverables, you can export your system security plan and generate a report, a word version of your SSP. But this section here is your browser view of your system security plan. It just makes it a lot easier to navigate the sections of your system security plan. So here is your scope and system information section, company section. Here's your section about your environment, and then here's the section about the requirements. And so you would want to use this system security plan subway stop page, right, to perform, you know, review your system security plan, get it approved if you want, and quickly edit any information. So for example, under scope, if I want to edit, let's say my system unique identifier is inaccurate, then I just click on the edit icon. It's going to bring me to that section of FutureFeed where I can quickly update that information. And now when I go back to my SSP, it's been updated. All right, so using this compliance review section here, let me clear it out. What you can do is assign all of the sections of the system security plan to the appropriate person who is going to be able to review this information one, make sure FutureFeed is filled out, and two, make sure that that information is accurate. And you can even have them approve the different sections of the SSP if you want. So let's see here. Data inventory. Let's go to the data inventory. So I would, for example, data inventory, I would want to assign this section of FutureFeed to maybe my information owner or my data custodian, someone who really understands what FCI is and CUI is and where it is in your company and the different categories. So you would assign this to someone who understands the data inventory, right? Get it assigned to someone, and now that person will come in here and review it. And they can mark when they've reviewed it, as well as when if they approve it. That's a little bit difficult, but okay. So you can use this compliance review section if you'd like, but we also have this checkbox here where if you want to flag that this section has been reviewed, just click it and it's been reviewed. It does track history. Okay. So that's about it. Any questions on the system security plan section of FutureFeed? All right. And then we have your system POA&M, your FutureFeed POA&M. Okay. So all throughout FutureFeed, when you marked an objective as not met, it created a POA&M. In your documents section, I think I would have called this out in the last session, but remember you have active documents. So these are documents that are approved, they're implemented, they're being followed. If you scroll down, these are pending documents. So these are things that are planned to be implemented. They're still in draft, they're still working in being edited. And so if I create a document down here, like I did for all these, then all of these are now on my system POA&M. Same thing for tools. You have an active tool section and a pending. Anything I log down here is going to be put on my system POA&M. So all throughout FutureFeed, you've created POA&Ms and they're going to show up here under your FutureFeed on this page here. There's pending, in progress, and completed. And currently I have 132 open POA&M items for this sample environment. And that's a lot of different line items to track. Again, when like I mentioned, I used to work for the DoD and I had to do compliance management and EMAS. And at least once a month, we had to provide a status update on open POA&M items. So we had to open up every item and provide a status update, go to the next one. You know, it's a lot of different, 132 is a lot of different system flaws, non-compliance items to kind of track. And so what we've done is implemented this project builder with the goal of reducing the number of different items that you have to follow up on. The goal then would be to group like non-compliance, or maybe you group a bunch of items together because one team is working on them or one person is responsible to work on them. So group them however you'd like and then make different projects. So in this environment here, now instead of 132 items, I have to focus on just these individual projects and checking in on them and making sure work is still ongoing and there's progress being made and there's no issues, all that stuff. Over in my project builder, I like to do this for the FutureFeed environment is under proposed projects. If you filter by this, anything that has a plus means it's not yet part of a project. Project. I don't know how to say that. I think I say that word so many times it sounds funny to me. All right, so what I could do, let's see, let's find one. Here I have a policy one. So, and it's not part of a project. I can add one here, or you could click on it and go up to add to projects. And I would put this one part of my documentation maybe, okay? So it's as simple as just clicking the ones you want to put in a project, add to project, add them to an existing project, or you can create a new project. What did I? And hit create. So the goal would be to put everything in some sort of project, but know that you may have a couple poem items not part of a project. So don't forget about those. Don't forget about following up on those ones and making sure the work's being done. And then after you create a project, you come over here, you open up the project, and then you would fill out all this metadata, you know, get it assigned to one person, start, stop date. Here's project status. If there's any price involved with the remediation, you have an area to upload status updates, project plans, implementation plans, any documentation. And then here, pending poems, these are all of the individual poem items that are part of this one project. You do have the capability to export. Let me get out of here. So you can export to CSV or Excel, print it. Same thing over here under the individual poem items. You can export them. You can move your columns around and I guess not move them around in this part, but you know, select the columns you want to see. Some filters if you're searching for different items. And then again, maybe you want to assign this to the project or a poem manager or project manager. Okay. Any questions with the your FutureFeed poem area? All right. So the last thing we'll cover is the deliverables section here. This is, of course, where you can export, you can run a system security plan report. Just click on SSP report and download, or if you click on the play button, it's going to present from FutureFeed that system security plan. After you download, export a system security plan, I want to show you this capability if you'd like to use it. You can go into the history and click edit, and there's some additional fields you can track here. So version, you know, maybe you'd like to log why did you run another SSP report? What was changed in that SSP? Maybe give it a version number or your own versioning scheme, you know. If you want to track that SSP revision has been approved, you can do so here, approved date. And if you've submitted your score in SPRS and that score aligns with this system security plan that you generated, you can track that here. And that's in the revision history, edit, actions, edit. Okay. If you're generating a system security plan for the purpose of submitting a SPRS score, we do have a SPRS submission area here. If you click on snapshot now, it's going to generate your system security plan and log it down below. Again, you can track some data here by clicking on the edit, but this is really, you know, this is the difference here, is this information. So whenever you submit your SPRS score, you have to put assessment date, your score, company, and the poem date. So all this information just helps you with submitting that information in SPRS. And also then you have a archived version of that system security plan that aligns with that score that you submitted if you ever get audited. In exports, you can export all of the files, the documents that you've put into FutureFeed, and you can also export all the data you've put into FutureFeed. You might want to use this area when you go into a C3PO assessment and they ask for all of your evidence. You can quickly generate that evidence file using these data exports, file exports. You can also export from here your POA&M actions and POA&M reports, but it's just in that docx format. So if you want to get your POA&M in an Excel format, CSV format, you'll want to export it from your system POA&M area over here under exports. And then the last thing here is we have this presentation builder or report builder. So let's pretend I want to meet with my tech writer who is responsible for developing and reviewing, editing all my compliance documentation. So I want to present them that one project. So down here, I'm going to select in table of contacts, I'm just going to select what I want to see in that report or that presentation. Maybe I want to show them my system security plan, and I'm going to go find that documents. Where is it? Here. It's already selected. Okay. It's already visible. So I'm making it visible, my documentation project. And now I'm going to hit play. And I have a report or a presentation on just my system security plan and that one project. Okay. So here's my system security plan highlights. If I scroll down, it highlights some information from my SSP. And then going over, here's the documentation project that my tech writer is working on, and it has all the information, what different POA&M items are part of this project, completed items, pending actions, and then all of this data here would be filled out if it was filled out in FutureFeed. So again, these reports, these presentations are only as accurate as the data you have in FutureFeed because it's pulling from the data in FutureFeed. All right, we've ran out of time, and I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna stop sharing and address any questions. Let's see. Okay. All right. Someone had a drop. Any questions? Does anyone have any questions? Anything else they'd like me to go over in FutureFeed? All right. If not, then thank you all for your time this afternoon. I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting. And so now you've gone through training 1 and training 2, but just know that you can sign up for as many training sessions as you'd like. And we do have that Thursday session. Does anybody not know about the Thursday session? Okay, so as you're working in FutureFeed, if you don't want to sign up for another training session, but you still have a question or two or you need some guidance, just join that Thursday session and ask it there, and I'm happy to help, walk you through whatever it is you need walk through. Okay, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the call. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Reach out to support@futurefeed.co if you need anything. Bye.